I am a massive fan of the Avatar series, and honestly, I'm surprised that it took me this long to get into the comics, because they are insanely good. Today, I want to specifically talk about the first of them, The Promise, and look at its major themes. This isn't going to be a video breaking down everything that happens in this book, because I will be making that video separately. Instead, I want to specifically look at The Promise and how it deals with the theme of the coexistence of foreign cultures, because honestly, I think this is a good place to start talking about it. Inspired by Imperial Japan pulling its colonies out of foreign nations at the end of World War II, the main conflict of The Promise is that during the 100-Year War, the Fire Nation established several colonies within the Earth Kingdom. These cities were taken by force, and with Zuko becoming the Fire Lord after the war, the idea was to dissolve them, send all of the Fire Nation citizens back to their home country, and return the cities to the Earth Kingdom. However, this proved to be a challenge, as due to the age of some of these colonies, generations were born and raised here, leading to a full-on blend of cultures. For example, the oldest of the colonies, Vydal, has become one of the richest cities on the planet because of their superior metal crafting, something that was only achieved through the combination of Earth and Fire Nation techniques. Now, of course, it's shown that the Earth Kingdom residents in Vydal are often treated as second-class citizens, but a majority of them are actually okay with this dynamic and want to keep the current status quo? Okay, look, a subjugated people being okay with their own oppression is definitely problematic in its own right, but this is by no means the right video to open up that particular can of worms, just something that I wanted to highlight. Anyway, while Aang, Zuko, and the Earth King come to the conclusion that dissolving the colonies and deporting the Fire Nation citizens is the right move, Zuko goes back on the plan once he gets a look into the lives of the citizens in Vydal. This puts him at odds with Aang, who firmly believes in the separation of the world's people into 4 distinct nations, thinking that having them exist separately would bring balance to the world. But after seeing life in Vydal for himself, Aang starts to come around on the idea of unity. This can further be seen when he and Katara visit Ba Sing Se and encounter the official Avatar Aang fan club, a group of squealing fangirls that are completely obsessed with him. Oh, and by the way, this fan club is going to be what the bulk of this video is going to be focusing on, so let's go ahead and move on to that. The fan club is super into air nomad culture, going so far as to try to make their clubhouse resemble the Western Air Temple by incorporating plenty of upside-down decorations. I mean, they didn't do it well, but it's the thought that counts, and Aang doesn't seem to have a problem with it. One member even got her hands on a traditional Airbender flute, which Aang was delighted to see and play. Although it was just a silly fan club, Aang almost felt like he was among his people once again, and that experience meant the world to him. Later in the book, Aang meets the Vydal chapter of the fan club, and they are way different than the previous one that he encountered. These folks care a lot more about air nomad culture, and they did their best to research all that they could about Aang's people, even recreating their clothes. Aang is initially super excited about this, but when the fan club's president mentions that the markings on their heads were actual traditional airbender tattoos, his enthusiasm turned to disgust. See, in his culture, airbender tattoos are sacred and are earned through years of airbender training. Sure, the fan club only gave themselves the tattoos after mastering hundreds of airbender-like forms, but according to Aang, this was taking things way too far. Now, I'm not going to pretend like Aang has always been the most level-headed when it comes to reacting to things that upset him, but in general, he's a pretty understanding dude. I mean, he was nice to these gals at first, so why would something as seemingly innocent as tattoos be such a big deal when he was fine with the previous chapter celebrating different aspect of the air nomads? Well, partaking in more casual aspects like decorations and clothes are one thing, but the Vydal fan club members were essentially turning a big part of Aang's religion into a costume, and that's where the line of appreciation versus appropriation was crossed for him. Okay, so let's talk cultural appropriation. The dictionary definition of it is the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another and typically more dominant people or society. In practice though, what is or isn't appropriation is a bit of a case-by-case basis, as it varies depending on which cultures are being quote-unquote taken from, and also the philosophies of individual people. For example, a teenage girl in 2018 set the internet on fire when she wore a Chinese qipao dress to prom, and opinions were mixed. Some Chinese people saw this as disrespectful co-option of traditional attire, and others saw it as a victory for Chinese culture. Debates like these are nothing new, and they're not going away anytime soon. But the case of the official Avatar Aang fan club is an interesting starting point for this discussion. First off, let's address the elephant in the room. Avatar is a fictional series, and while the cultures depicted in it are based on ones from the real world, they are not real themselves. Additionally, even in the context of this universe, the air nomads are specifically specifically hard to talk about since they were hunted to extinction by Fire Lord Sozin at the beginning of the war. Aang is the only survivor, which puts him in a very unique and stressful position. It's clear that Aang wants to rebuild and restore his people, as evidenced by how he said that in order for balance to exist, there must be 4 separate nations. Kind of difficult to do when one of them was literally killed off. Clearly, Aang was okay with the fan club celebrating his people, and he only really got mad when he heard the Vydal members mention that their head markings were literal tattoos. It gets tricky though, because these tattoos are clearly something that's more about having air nomad ancestry rather than just being an airbending master, as we can see that of all of the previous avatars, the only ones that have the tattoos are air nomads. If it was strictly about mastering airbending, then you would expect all of them to also have these markings. This is why the fan club adorning themselves is problematic, because the club is just that, a group that thinks Aang is really cool. They're well-meaning and have clearly done some research, but they're adorning themselves in traditional air nomad tattoos with little regard or understanding for the complete meaning behind them. This would be like if me, the whitest guy imaginable, got some traditional African scarification done, or if I decided to perform a baptism despite not being a priest. These markings and actions are sacred to their people, and an outsider choosing to do them because they seem cool is massively disrespectful. Even if I were to heavily do my research, it wouldn't matter how much I knew about these groups, because I think we can all agree that me scarring myself or acting like a priest wouldn't be very appropriate. But here's the thing. For something like a religion, which admittedly there is nuance to depending on the particular one in question, converting is possible, and I could theoretically work my way into it. But for something that's more specific to a particular people, well, chances are that I'm just going to need to accept the fact that I will always be an outsider. And honestly, that's fine. As an American, the idea of a melting pot is great. A variety of cultures have come together and influenced one another, which has led to the great metropolitan society that we have today. But in practice, it's more like a salad bowl. There's lots of pieces coming together to create one dish, but each piece is still its own complete entity. I think this is more of what Aang was wanting when he was talking to Katara about his feelings about the fan club. He expressed that he liked what made his heritage different and unique from everyone else, but although he would like to preserve it, he understands that he can't just live as a hermit protecting ancient relics. Hell, if that was the case, then his entire relationship with Katara could be an issue. I mean, after all, she's from the Water Tribe, and even if he didn't stay with her, any children that he would father would inherently be of mixed heritage. It also doesn't help that a central part of Aang's character is that he has survivor's guilt because he ran from his duties as the Avatar and wasn't there to help his people against the genocide carried out by the Fire Nation. Seeing something so important to his people be bastardized and co-opted as a result of his inaction has definitely got to hurt. Outside of that though, Aang is in a position not that uncommon from many minorities, especially ones that have relocated to other countries. They have this deep desire to connect to their heritage, and it can really hurt to see other people who just don't understand the significance behind the culture try to emulate it because it seems cute or cool or fun. It can be a real internal struggle of wanting people to love and respect your unique background while also respecting it enough to not devalue and or steal it. As someone whose upbringing is extremely important to him, this internal conflict for Aang is something extremely challenging and even a little debilitating, considering that he has to deal with it in the middle of trying to keep the Earth and Fire Nations from going to war over the colonies. Ultimately, Aang comes to the realization that the only way that his nearly extinct culture is going to survive is if he shares it, and it's this newfound desire to adapt and embrace a united future that helps Aang come to terms with his place in the colonial conflict. He decides to stand with Zuko against the Earth King and not letting the colonies get dissolved. Yes, it was wrong for the Fire Nation to establish these colonies in the first place, but after all this time, the integrated nature of them has made it to where they culturally don't belong to either nation. They belong to both, and as a result, they're going to need to hash out a better resolution than simply keeping them as the dominion of either nation, but that'll need to be saved for a different book. With Zuko out cold from the fight and unable to get the peace talk started until he woke up, Aang takes this time to apologize to his fan club. He admits that although he's nervous about it, he can't keep living in the past. He also takes it upon himself to teach the club about his people's ways, but in a much more respectful way. From then on, the fan club became the Air Acolytes. I think a big reason why Aang came to this conclusion is that when he encountered the Vydal chapter again, they covered up their tattoos, respecting Aang's offense when it was brought to their attention. They only really had some scattered text, and obviously some stuff got lost in translation. But as soon as they learned where they messed up, they rectified their mistake instantly. They clearly want to engage in the culture in an appropriate way, but just needed proper guidance. Aang stepping in and teaching them is clearly the appropriate middle ground here. We know from the legend of Korra that the air acolytes eventually grew in number, taking residence in the ancient air temples. However, we can also see that none of them received tattoos. This implies that when Aang was teaching and establishing the rules for his new organization, he specifically made sure that only airbenders could receive them. People are still able to engage with and celebrate air nomad culture, but it's in a healthy way that doesn't violate the sacred aspect of the nomad's ancestry. Once again, cultural appropriation is a very tricky subject to talk about because it really does vary on a case-by-case basis, with no real consensus of what is and isn't taking it too far. But hopefully this look into a fictional instance was at least interesting enough to get you thinking. Maybe I'm just way off base with this, and that's probably fair, but these are just my thoughts, and I'm glad that you watched this far to let me share them with you. If any of this has been interesting, then definitely pick up the book for yourself and check it out. And if you don't have a local comic shop, then I actually have a link in the description down below for both the physical and digital releases, and if you buy it through my link, it helps out the channel. It's not a lot of money, but, you know, every penny counts. But anyway, if you like this video, then why not consider subscribing, or even watching another one? And if you liked this, well, then there's a good chance that you're probably going to like the other Avatar video that I did, covering all of the little mini comics that take place in between episodes of the show that were released in like Nick magazine and stuff. I'm actually really happy with how that video turned out, so yeah, you know, maybe go give that a watch. But anyway, I hope you learned at least a little something new, and hopefully, I'll see you next time.